We have a great lineup for you with Alana Beard from the Washington Mystics, Beth Brooke from Ernst & Young, Nancy Hogshead-Makar from the Women's Sports Foundation, and our moderator, Tom Farrey, the award-winning, Emmy-winning ESPN correspondent. Tom has written a book called Game On, The All-American Race to Make Champions of Children, which was honored as the 2008 Sports Education Book of the Year and is the leading journalistic work on contemporary youth sports and is required text at many universities. He's also won 2 Emmys now for outstanding sports journalism. So I will turn you over to his good hands with my thanks to you again for being here and thanks to Ernst & Young.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming, and also I want to thank the Aspen Ideas Festival people for putting us at this venue. I mean, who knew that we'd be talking about Title IX with Snoop Dogg on the back wall, right?
Exactly.
How cool is that?
And
you know?
wine on her, too.
And it's okay to drink here, too. So we're going to let it rip, you know? All right, so you know what? I love this topic. As a kid growing up in South Florida, the most significant sports event in 1972, I was 8 at the time, to me was the 17-0 Miami Dolphins, the perfect team, still the only perfect record in history. Now I know better. 1972 brought us Title IX, the law that declared that, quote, and it's important to know the language here, Nancy's worked with it for years, that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving, she knows it by heart, federal financial assistance. In fact, as a sports journalist, I would argue that Title IX was the most significant event in the history of U.S. sports since the introduction of organized school-based sports more than a century ago. Why? Because Title IX opened up sports participation to half of the U.S. population, girls. Consider the impact of Title IX. Between 1971 and 2004, the number of girls playing varsity high school sports increased from 295,000 to 3 million, a 1,000% increase. Instead of 1 of every 27 high school girls playing on teams, now it's more like 2 out of 5. The number of women playing on college sports has also exploded. This mass wave of girls has translated into glory on the international stage. Our women's teams have won Olympic gold medals in soccer, softball, volleyball, basketball, and many other sports. If not for Title IX, it's highly doubtful that the U.S. would win the medal count at the Summer Games every 4 years. We've seen the emergence of a new kind of female hero, strong, fit, competitive. Icons like Mia Hamm and Michelle Akers, Cammie Granato in hockey, Cheryl Swoops and Sue Bird in basketball. These women have proven to be valuable role models for young girls, like my daughter, Anna, who is 11. Just as importantly, boys and men have come to see and respect women as athletes who exhibit traits that society once recognized as distinctly masculine. I write about this in my book, Game On. Studies show that girls who play sports have more confidence in their physical and social selves than those who are sedentary. They're less likely to get pregnant, less likely to smoke, and less likely to use illicit drugs as teens. They get better grades. They grow up to become leaders. 4 out of 5 executive businesswomen in 2002 national survey played sports, and a vast majority said that lessons learned on the playing field contributed to their success. Today, we'll hear from 3 women who have found success both in and outside of the playing arena. Beth Brooke, who is in the middle, played college basketball at Purdue University in the late 70s as a scholarship athlete. She is now global vice chair of Ernst & Young, one of the world's largest private organizations. Beth has been named as one of the world's 100 most powerful women 3 consecutive years. She was also a finalist for the position of NCAA president earlier this year. Nancy Hogshead-Makar. Nancy, who's to my right here. Nancy swam at Duke University and went on to win 3 gold medals at the 1984 Olympics. She later got her law degree and became a professor of law. specializing in sports and Title IX law. She has been a longtime legal advisor to the Women's Sports Foundation, an organization whose advocacy for Title IX has been critical to the law's success. And on my far right, we have Alana Beard, another Duke athlete. I think there's a little conspiracy going on here. You know? Another former Duke athlete who has gone on to do great things. A native of Shreveport, Louisiana, is that right?
Yes.
Alana led the Blue Devils to the #1 rank in college, where she was named the National Player of the Year. She was the second player taken in the WNBA draft in 2004 and has been a perennial all-star for the Washington Mystics. Also, Alana has been very active in creating opportunities for other minority female athletes, sponsoring teams in Washington, D.C., as well as in Louisiana. With that, let's hear from our panelists. So the name of this panel is You Go Girl, How Title IX Galvanized Play for Women. But I'd like to turn that question inside out and ask each of our panelists, how did Title IX and play galvanize you personally and individually? You want to start, Nancy?
Hi, everybody. I've just had such a great time here at the Aspen Festival. I give a lot of speeches around the country, and I always say what a privilege it is to be able to speak, but I can say from the bottom of my heart just how honored I am to be able to be here and meet everybody, let alone be able to speak here. One of the themes of this track has been on the issue of play, and it's interesting. Normally in my daily life, I don't really think of play as being important in my life. I'm very serious. But when I think about when I was growing up, my idea of play was clearly physical movement. I used to move all the furniture out of our living room and do acrobatics or gymnastics, and I used to take great pride in winning the contest in the highest swing when I was 4 years old. And, I was always very sort of physically oriented play. But I really thought that all of my interest in athletics was going to end when I graduated from high school. When I was 14 years old, I was the #1 swimmer in the world. This was 1977. Quite a while ago. So, and a reporter asked me at that time, I just missed making the 1976 Olympics. A reporter asked me at that time, he said, you're going to be 18 years old for the 1980 Olympics. And I said, yes, won't that be perfect because of course I'm going to physically peak at the age of 18. And I thought women physically stopped because they just didn't get any better after that. But for this law of Title IX, I would not have gone on to Duke University on a full scholarship and had 4 more years of swimming and been able to swim in the 1984 Olympics. Remember, we boycotted those 1980 Olympics. So, but if it had not been for Title IX, I would not have had the extended swimming career that I did, and still, going my best. I mean, now it's even silly to think that, a woman is going to peak physically at the age of 18. But, that was definitely the going thing. But certainly expressing myself physically and being physically fit and strong has always been a big part of my play. And I've got 3 small kids, and that's a big part of our family life is physical, that really hard physical play.
And what's interesting is the idea that women had to retire from the game in their late teens or early 20s. I mean, that has now expanded dramatically. One of Nancy's teammates from the 1984 Olympics, Dara Torres, is still swimming at the age of 41.
Right.
So.
And still going her best times. Yeah, we shared a gold medal. We were on the same relay team together. And, she's had a child. She's 41, 42 years old. I just marvel at what she's been able to do. I think, yeah.
The point is we're continually redefining what is like not only to be an athletic woman, but how long you can do it and.
Well, right, what's possible for women as athletes and certainly, childbearing, how sort of the myth used to be. I wrote the pregnancy guidelines for the NCAA. And, one of the things we had to sort of figure out was how are we going to convince coaches that if they had a pregnant athlete that was not going to be the death knell of their athletic career. And Dara Torres just came along right at the right time and like, ta-da! You know, we really didn't need to. We did have all these success stories. We sort of combined all these success stories. But, you know, how great to have Dara right there to give coaches that idea that they could still support that athlete, make sure that athlete graduated, make sure that they got the support they needed in the same way that a male who, tears a ligament or who also gets injured and has a long injury. You know, you've got a long injury you're dealing with right now, but, you know, there's still light at the end of the tunnel. You can still get much better after that.
So let's hear from Alana. How did Title IX form who you are?
And I think Title IX has, allowed for so many opportunities. I was able to get a great education and a great athletic experience at one of the top institutions in the country. Unlike Beth and Nancy, I've never experienced being told I can't do this or I can't do that because of chauvinistic ideologies. And that was because all of the groundwork was laid before me, you know. And, you know, when I speak of the groundwork laid before me, I like to refer to it as the cycle of hope. And in my mind, it gives confidence and perseverance to those who are fighting to continue that fight. So with that being said, I understand that there were women before me that struggled for my generation. And I understand that I'm struggling for the generations to come. And with that, that desire led me to create youth sports organizations through my foundation. And my mission is to create what I would call no-excuse environments for young women by providing them with the necessary resources that are critical, you know, to the success in their lives, in every aspect of their lives. In my opinion, you know, they need to understand the process. They need to understand the struggle. And at that age, I didn't understand. I didn't have the education of Title IX. But as I matured and became older, it became clear that the things that I had and the things that I have are definitely a blessing. And I want to foster that same mentality to younger girls.
That's great. So you're really appreciative of the pioneers.
And I understand it.
Well, let's hear from one of the pioneers herself. Now, Beth came along at an interesting
like a
time.
dinosaur, doesn't it?
Beth, you know, Title IX was passed in 1972. You played. You entered Purdue University which year?
77.
77. So you're right at the cusp of this whole movement.
Yeah, and it's so, I got to tell you how unbelievable it is to hear Alana speak the way you do about and understanding the history, because it means so much. I mean, you know, I look back, Tom, and, you know, when you're going through it, I was one of the first beneficiaries. I was in the class. It was the first beneficiary of Title IX, even though it was passed in 1972. Once it was an educational provision, and once everybody realized it could affect sports, it delayed an implementation. So that's why it actually didn't implement until my year. And at the time, I wouldn't have known what Title IX was. I was just the beneficiary of things changing, and it's only in hindsight that I see what it did. You know, in fifth grade, I tried out for cheerleading, if you can believe that. I'm the most inflexible person in the world. And I didn't get selected, and of course all my buddies did. So I was excluded. And then at Title IX was passed in 72. In 73, at age 13, I had a debilitating hip injury, and I was told I'd never walk again. And took a course of a year to learn how to walk again, and eventually was able to walk. And I remember once I was able to walk, looking the doctor in the eye and remembering not being a cheerleader, and saying, I'm going to be the best darn athlete you've ever seen. But at that point, there were barely teams functioning in 73. So participated in everything, every sport in high school. And in my senior year then was part of a national championship team in softball and was an Indiana All-Star, which is a big deal in Indiana, where I grew up. And I remember getting scholarship letters in the mail, not thinking, I didn't want, girls didn't get scholarships, and they just came in the mail. Because I was thinking about where I wanted to go to school academically, and the scholarship came, and it was like, what was that? And and I went to Purdue then, went to visit Purdue, and then accepted that on a scholarship. But it was interesting. I was a much better softball player, frankly, but that didn't exist in college. Those teams weren't available, so you weren't even allowed to play what you were most gifted at. So then went to college and had just the interesting experience of being those first classes. Women then were not part of the NCAA. Even though Title IX was passed and we were scholarship recipients, women still were not had not been permitted to enter the NCAA. So what we all know is March Madness, what we all know is the NCAA tournament didn't exist. We had these odd state and regional tournaments, which were very normal to us because we didn't know any better. And it was in my junior year that women were actually brought into the NCAA and the NCAA tournament framework started. So again, it's only in hindsight that I see all those things. How did it galvanize me? Then I entered the business world in 1981. And again, it is only in hindsight that I remember vividly, but not appreciating it at the time, entering the business world and having, be with all your colleagues, but I would be the one they would say, oh yes, and she played basketball at Purdue. Mm-hmm. And I was singled out of my entering class for it. And it's, again, only later as I look back that made me feel included. As a woman, I was included. I never thought I couldn't be included. I had confidence. Sports had given me that sense, the teamwork, the discipline, the focus, the confidence. But again, I didn't realize how important it was to making me accepted in an incredibly male-dominated business world. I remember playing in golf scrambles and being asked to be on their team because I could hit from the red tees and hit a 250-yard drive, and they would always play my shot. And I didn't appreciate the importance of that, of just being accepted. So an enormous, the sports background, I attribute virtually everything I'm able to do today to that period.
Well, corporations are effectively teamwork environments. Talk to us a little bit about how knowing what it's like to be a member of a team, how that helped you in the corporate world.
Well, what I think is interesting is that, we all experience, especially as a member of a team, you know when to lead and you know when to follow. You know your role. You know how to play. You know that the success of the team, it's not about you. It's about the success of the team. You can have the greatest game in the world and lose, and so it's irrelevant. And having that just, part of you, I think, is incredibly important, as well as, especially for women, I think, in business, learning how to fail. You can lose a game and you're going to go out the next day or lose a meet, and you're going to go out the next day and win. You're going to work harder, you're going to practice harder. You're never going to go into a meeting unprepared. You'd never walk into a game unpracticed and unprepared. And so many people in business walk into things unprepared. There's no discipline, there's no focus, there's no understanding that you need to have envisioned winning that game before you got there.
Can you see, working at Ernst & Young, can you see a difference between the women who are coming into the workforce now who played sports and those who did not?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, my team probably knows. I'll hire an athlete and know that I can train in the competence I need. I can't train in the competence that an athlete, that a leader, that what athletics teaches you as a leader comes out with. There's a definite difference. The statistic you cited about 80% of today's senior female executives have sports in their background. That doesn't surprise me at all because it's so important.
You have a thought, Nancy?
Yeah, I was just going to say that those are all things that we know that you just can't teach on a blackboard. You can't teach it in a classroom, how to win, how to lose, how to postpone short-term gratification for long-term, how to be part of a team, and everything you just said. You can only learn that by having had that experience. I always say one of the best things that I learned in my competitive career, which I don't want to overemphasize because it's not like the main thing, but it was in getting in the water on the days that I did not want to, with every cell in my body. The water was cold. Everybody was cranky. World-class training is 800 laps a day. I had done it the day before that, the day before. I was exhausted and still doing it anyway because I was committed to something else. And that's that is the major thing that I have taken from my sports career. Don't get me wrong, probably 150 of my Facebook friends are all old swimmers. I have great friends and whatnot, but just the kind of discipline that you learn through having a sports experience has been invaluable.
No question.
So, my next question is, as you said, Title IX was really not enforced for much of the 1970s. And then in the 1980s, there were a number of other impediments which sort of slowed things down. In 1992, I think there was a court decision that said that programs could be fined, right, monetarily, and that sort of motivated athletic programs out there
Right.
to take this thing seriously?
Right, that somebody could go into a court of law and they could get monetary damages for the fact that schools were discriminating against them. So there was a question as to whether or not there was a private cause of action. So that got settled in 90. The story of Title IX has not been one of sort of this uninterrupted, it has really been this fluctuation as the three branches of government have independently, they've each done their own thing that has, and you can track the number of women who are participating in sports and the kind of experience they're having graphically with something else that goes on. So, as an example, between 1984, there was a bad Supreme Court decision which said that Title IX only applied to the program that received the federal funds. So if your student loan program or your math program got federal funds, that program couldn't discriminate based on gender. But your athletic program or your housing program or your math program could discriminate all they wanted to. So that pretty much gutted Title IX. So we had like 5 years there, and during that time you see the growth of women's sports is essentially flat. We've had some other times very recently during the Bush administration where they essentially weren't enforcing the law. The delta, the gap between men and women's sports participation, even though women's sports were growing, men's sports were actually growing at a faster rate. So the difference between men and women was growing. So you can really see when you have something bad happening in the court or the administrative or something happening in Congress, sort of how that all works out and stuff. It has not been this nice, easy road. When I was in law school, I really thought, I knew that Title IX was something that was really interesting to me and what I wanted to get into law school for. But I really thought it was going to be over by the time I graduated.
I have to admit, I have to confess, as a former athlete, I hate to admit, I didn't realize some of that was going on, and that Title IX's been very fragile at times, and I didn't fully appreciate that.
It's this organization, the Women's Sports Foundation, that has provided incredible advocacy behind the scenes, working with the Department of Education to make sure that the law is applied. Let me ask you this. So Title IX has been a success, but we haven't achieved equality, have we? Still more boys play than girls. And specifically, and Alana, I want to throw this out at you. We've seen a lot of colleges create women's soccer programs, lacrosse programs, ice hockey programs. Some have said that Title IX has mostly benefited girls from upper income, socioeconomic, suburban communities where these sports are popular. And they've said, well, what about girls from underserved communities, minority communities? Why haven't we seen the growth there? Give me your perspective on what you have seen in terms of how Title IX, how far it has come and how far it still has to go in terms of serving minority girls.
I honestly think it goes back to the understanding of Title IX and the opportunities that are there for young girls in underserved communities. I can give you a perfect example. About 3 days ago, I received an email from a young lady reaching out to me, wanting to play at the next level. And she was told that I was the right person, to reach out to. So the fact that she feels that, I was that right person to reach out to, Title IX has had that type of impact. It has allowed individuals from those communities to come out of those communities, become successful, go back to those communities and give back and introduce a new culture, introduce new life experiences. And that's just a great impact that, Title IX has had. It instills hope and it creates opportunities.
Should we be doing more to create more opportunities for girls in these communities?
I think with each generation it grows. You can push so hard. The advice that I've gotten before is that to hold on loosely. Sometimes you can want something so much so you let it slip out of your hands. And I think at the rate that we're going with people like Nancy and Beth, it's only going to continue to improve. And myself.
Well, Nancy, you spent a lot of time thinking about these issues.
Sure.
Is there anything? How do you feel about the fact that Title IX has disproportionately benefited white suburban girls?
I don't know that empirically that's true. I know that basketball and track and field are some of the most popular sports and the most played sports out there. I think that for both men and women, not just women, that trying to get good sports programming into schools and into communities is a tough nut to crack. So one of the other sessions I was listening to today, when they were talking about what is it that keeps people from being able to make sort of what we think of as rational decisions, or what is it that sort of keeps people poor or whatnot, and that is that when it's very difficult for somebody who doesn't have reliable transportation to get their kids to and from 2 workouts a day, sometimes 3 workouts a day, to find out who the good coach is, when they're struggling to really put food on the table. And that's why community support is so important, and that's why school programs are so important, because the parent only has to pick them up once. They don't have to pick them up and then take them someplace else, and they've got 2 other kids, and they're doing their. That's why school programs are so important, to make sure that that everybody has these sports opportunities.
That's one things I worry about in the underserved and the well-served communities right now is the budget cuts that we face, and you see emerging the pay-to-play type scenarios that will certainly disadvantage the underserved.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, they went through a series of budget cuts in public recreation, and they let private organizations use their fields more often. And when that happened, by a ratio of 4 to 1, it was boys' programs as opposed to girls' programs that were seeing the benefit. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen big cuts to public recreation, more of a privatization of youth sports, really.
I think athletic directors are at least more cognizant of gender equity, whereas legislatures or city councilors or whatnot are not so focused on gender equity with their baseball, softball programs or but California, as a result, you were telling me this earlier, they actually passed a statute that requires gender equity in how it is that they're doing their community-based programming. Well, actually, most states do have public accommodation laws. I mean, you cannot use public funds to go discriminate, and that certainly would include gender as well. But I want to tell you a quick story. So Florida last year, in a budget-cutting move, they cut between 20 and 40% of all competitive opportunities except for football, which means that 30% of all boys did not have their sports opportunities cut, whereas 100% of girls had their sports opportunities cut. So we sued, and honestly, we should not have had to sue. It was one of those kind of no-brainers. It's one of those, like, I should have just had to write a demand letter, and you can either listen to me or a federal judge. And the good thing is, because the state of Florida loves football so much, every sport got their games reinstated. Every sport did. So boys and girls, the whole gambit wide. But it is important when times are tough, you have to be cognizant of making sure that those cuts, that they don't impact girls disproportionately than boys by exempting certain sports or whatnot.
Critics of Title IX say that, we've seen all these cuts to wrestling programs, soccer programs, gymnastics programs around the country. How should we think about that? I mean, what do the numbers say? Are those numbers real?
Yeah.
And some thoughts on that.
Yeah. There's a lot of empirical research on that. There's been 3 major studies. 2 of them have been by the General Accounting Office. John Cheslock has done some great work that was actually funded by the Women's Sports Foundation that really took a hard look at what programs were being dropped, where were they being dropped, and what programs were being added, and where were they being added. And when you look big picture, when you combine, Division 1, 2, 3, when you look at all programs have been added and programs that have been dropped, men's programs are still being added at a good clip, and both their programs and their opportunity to participate, which means sort of they have more people on individual teams. So it is true, some sports are losing. Wrestling, men's swimming is being cut. But they're only being cut at a very small area, and that is Division 1A, which is about 120 schools. Those schools are on a wild and crazy spending spree that is mostly going to men's football and basketball, is not going to other women's sports. So empirically, empirically speaking, you just can't say that that's true. I've got the numbers here. In the last 10 years, 364 men's teams have been created in Division III, and 142 men's teams have been created in Division II, but 277 teams have been lost on Division I level. But it's awfully hard to say that it's because of their sisters.
Well, in the state of Texas, I got this email from an advocacy group the other day that doesn't agree with Title IX, saying that, in the state of Texas, there's only like one Division I program that offers a men's soccer program. And is that fair? My question is this, though. How much of the problem is simply football, right? Football has these rosters of 100, 120 athletes for a sport that only 11 people are on the field at one time. If college teams, cut the rosters to even just what the NFL holds, which is 60 or so people at a time, do we not have this problem? And are we able to retain boys soccer programs?
Well, that thought has been brought up a number of times. My worry is that, and Beth, you probably have some thoughts on this, is that if they did make drastic cuts to the number of sports participation opportunities for men, that money would not go to fund other men's programs like swimming or wrestling, that that money would probably be going into this enormous spending spree that's going on in Division I with men's football and basketball. In the past 10 years, athletics at Division I has been growing at a 7% increase rate, and meanwhile the spending for general student population is growing at a 2% rate. It's at an unsustainable level, this level of spending that they're doing, which would be fine if sort of revenues were commensurate with this spending, but that's just not true. 80% of schools, 80% of all Division I schools, so it's a small group, it's only 120 schools, but it's the schools that you normally think of, are putting over $10 million per year into their athletics program. That's coming from your math program, your housing program. It's coming from the general budget over into athletics. Almost all students in Division I school have to pay an activities fee, which is really going to fund the men's football team.
I want to throw a question out to Alana and Beth. Adversaries of Title IX say, well, why are you forcing this on us? Well, girls don't want to play sports as badly as boys want to play sports. We do have a survey that asks girls in high school, school sports, non-school sports, boys in those sports as well, why they play sports. And, across the board it was to have fun. Boys and girls all want to have fun. For boys, or for girls, the number 2 motive was to stay in shape. Number 3 motive was to get exercise, which is sort of the same motive. For boys, it was more like number 10. Boys are more interested in the challenge of competition, and there seemed to be kind of at least different motivations for playing sports. When you hear survey results like that, what runs through your mind?
Well, doesn't surprise me. In business we've been through that for so long, of finally getting to a place where we respect the different perspectives of men and women. In fact, we understand now that we need to value the different perspectives of men and women because we all come from very different human experiences, which makes our perspectives valuable. So the fact that men and women in sports may be motivated differently, rings true, and that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, you still assess success by whether you won or lost. And so why I'm choosing to play the game doesn't really matter to me. So I don't.
The point is that you want to play the game. It's fair to say that girls want to play just as badly as boys, but maybe it's for different reasons?
Yeah. And in my mind, that's the beauty of Title IX. Title IX didn't say, you got to play. Title IX said, we need to make it possible that if you want to play, you can play. And that's, to me, why Title IX was beautiful.
Yeah, and Title IX also didn't say, if you want to play, you can play football just like the boys do.
Yeah.
What it said was, boys and girls may have very different interests in different kinds of sports, and we can accommodate that. So boys do get to play football, a very different sport, and girls really, they want to play softball and volleyball and swim and gymnastics or whatever sport. So, the law really doesn't care whether or not an athlete is wearing football pads or is wearing a swimsuit or, it just cares, are you giving this kid an equal educational opportunity? And the Women's Sports Foundation, in the history of the foundation, we do not know of a single instance when a school hired a coach, got facilities, and got the bells, whatever level it is that the school is playing, not know a single instance where that coach was not able to find athletes who were ready and willing to play that team sport. So, it's tough to sort of separate out what somebody's interested in from what opportunities that they've been given. So when you think of in your own lives, like, would you have been interested in business if somebody hadn't given you that business course to first start off, right? So, think of all the weird things that you're interested in, and sort of somebody sort of opened that door for you. And so, first things first, you've got to give kids those opportunities. And right now, women lag behind men in every measurable criteria in athletics. So whether or not it's participation opportunities, whether it's operating budgets, whether it's recruiting, whether, in scholarship dollars, in every measurable criteria. And we got to do something about that.
In a nutshell, really quickly, because I want to leave enough time for Q&A here.
Sure.
How has the Obama administration done on this issue?
Well, pretty good so far. I mean, one of the main things about, first of all, let me say that Title IX is really not a political animal in that I've got poll results here. We've had a lot of polls over the past weeks. In 2007, the Mellman Group did a poll that has a 95% level of confidence, showing that 82% of the public support Title IX, 65% strongly support it, only 15% oppose it, only 9% strongly oppose it. This is true for Democrats, Republicans, Independents. It's true for men and women. It's true for people with and without children. So, I mean, any politician would die for those numbers, being interested in athletics. It was sort of a fluke of politics that the Bush administration got caught up in trying to weaken Title IX. So I really don't want to make it a Democrat-Republican type thing, but the Obama administration so far has been great. And one of the best ways that they've been great is they've added teeth to the enforcement of Title IX. So if you had a complaint, there are two ways to have enforcement. One is to go and file a lawsuit in the federal courts. That's a wildly expensive way. We cannot sue our way into compliance. It's just too expensive. The little lawsuit I had was like $120,000 against the Florida High School Athletic Association. The other way is for essentially the government to do it, sort of the police, and which is the Office of Civil Rights, who's responsible for enforcing it. And so right now the Office of Civil Rights is doing their job. When they get a complaint, they're making sure that it's happening.
Tom, can I say one more thing about the Obama administration, though? I mean, Title IX was fundamentally about education and not about sports. And, the one thing the Obama administration has been very public about is using Title IX now in STEM, in the science and math and technology education, to make sure there are equal opportunities for young girls in that. So they've been very supportive.
Beth, you feel that Title IX, has been such a success in the world of sports that perhaps it could be used as a model or at least an inspiration for other aspects, other American institutions. Is that fair to say?
Oh, I feel passionately about that. You mentioned in the introduction that I was one of the finalists for president of the NCAA, and that is absolutely something I would have tried to do as president, would be to be more of an advocate. I mean, Title IX is the only example of what I call gender mainstreaming that we have in our country, where, you think about the most recent stimulus bill that was passed. You won't find anything in there that looks like anybody took into consideration gender in any of the stimulus.
Meeting the needs of mothers.
Needs of mothers, to keep them in the workforce, just no evidence whatsoever. You look at almost any U.S. public policy, and other than Title IX, there's nothing oriented toward women. So I think Title IX is such a great success, and we haven't tried to take it outside. And all the issues that we face with the lack of women, we have, 17% of our political leadership are women. 3% of Fortune's 500 CEOs are women. 15% of our corporate boards are women. I mean, the statistics, I could go on and on, are just awful in every other sector of society except sports. And yet we don't talk about taking Title IX, the concept of it, into other areas.
Right. I have several other questions, but I'm not going to be selfish. I'm going to throw this over to the crowd here because we only have about 10, maybe 15 minutes to take some questions. So let's. I can barely see here, so if your hands are up, I apologize. Does anybody have a question?
Hi. My name's Lori, and I'm lucky enough to work and live here in Aspen. But in terms of galvanizing, I've been a benefactor of Title IX as I received a full scholarship to UNH as a field hockey player in 1987. And then it also gave me my first job as a lacrosse coach at Brown University. But that being said, I remember when I worked at Brown as a lacrosse coach, I shared an office with the men's lacrosse staff. And they had just gone through a big lawsuit for Title IX. And they said, well, you're here because the gymnastics team sued the university. And essentially, I was made to feel really guilty about having my job there. But I guess the point I want to share with you, and I coach the girls lacrosse team here in Aspen, and I know your daughter plays lacrosse, and thank you for plugging it. But I think Title IX is really about, it's not so much about, and I ask you three for your help in this, it's not so much about cutting programs. It's about asking athletic directors and administrators to look at budgets and to take a look at their expense accounts and how they're allocating their funds.
Fairness.
And I'm fighting that right now with the Aspen High School athletic department. I mean, she's unfortunately thinking of cutting programs to build my program. But I just think that we need to make sure that it's not about, in this day and age, in 2010, about cutting programs. It's about asking, people like Gene DiFilippo at Boston College to take a look at his program and stop cutting the men's programs, but asking himself, how is he spending what does his budget look like?
Well, and I think that's the point Tom sort of touched on is, if you look at how the other programs are run, and if they were run more efficiently, and I mean, I will tell you at the Final Four this year, I could not help but I had the great fortune to be at the final game, the Butler-Duke game. And I'm sorry, you guys are both Duke alums.
You're sorry.
No, you're based on what I'm going to say, I'm sorry in advance. But I sat there and I was sort of mid-court, and I'm watching the pregame, and it was so striking. I was mid-court, and so the benches were both in front of me, and I'm watching the Duke team warm up here and the Butler team warm up here, and I'm watching the sideline. And on the Butler sideline, there was the coach and his assistant and some manager. And on the Duke sideline, there was the coach, and there was one assistant for every frickin' player. It was a sideline of suits.
Managers, not assistants.
Okay, manager. Yeah, I didn't know who they were, but it was so striking. And I said, the amount of money that is being spent at one program versus another, and I was just stunned by it. I mean, it was really striking. So, I mean, it is a matter of budgets, to your point. The other point you raised that I wanted to mention, perhaps, what I find fascinating is the coaching situation since Title IX. We celebrate the women participation, but when Title IX was passed, the statistics I've read is that 80% of the coaches of women's sport, 80% of the coaches of women's sports were women. In 2004, it was down to 44% of the coaches of women's sports were women. So I can only imagine it's been on a trend line down.
It's 42 now.
Is it 42 now?
Mm-hmm.
I find that just appalling. And the most highest paid positions are predominantly men.
And when you figure that almost no women are coaching men.
Right.
So when you look at, women's opportunity to be able to coach generally is very, and the trend is going down. And, this is one reason why it's so great having Beth in the position that she is. It really matters who the athletic director is and who the president of the university is and how high a rank a woman is. The more women that you have in the senior administration, the more likely you are to have women coaches.
Well, it's the same thing in business. The more women you have at the decision-making table, the more protected you are. And my point is we're more exposed now.
Right.
Definitely. Well, let's try and get another question here.
Can I ask Alana real quick? I have a question
sure,
for her.
sure.
Sheila Johnson,
Yes.
owner of the Mystic. What's that like? I mean, you got a woman owner.
We have a woman owner who has done tremendous things, with her life, with her life experiences. When you think of BET, you think of Bob Johnson, but in reality, it was Bob Johnson and Sheila Johnson. And she's gone on to do just tremendous things. And the fact that she decided to purchase the Mystics. Before, I think I came in 2004, and Abe Poland was the owner of the Mystics. And to see the difference in passion when Sheila Johnson took over from when Abe Poland, with Abe Poland, it was just a hobby. It was something for his wife to do. But when Sheila Johnson came in, she really took to heart the fact that she wanted to instill certain things into women. And she's very passionate about it. And perfect example is me being here. Sheila Johnson was supposed to be here tonight, but in return, she asked me to come in her place. And I would have never had that type of experience with maybe someone else as my owner. So I'm very appreciative of it.
Okay, let's take the question.
My name's John. I'm from South Carolina. My question is in regards to viewership of sports. With the exception of the Olympics, the vast majority of sports that media is consumed in sports, the World Cup, NBA Finals, whatnot, is all male sports. Do you guys view that as an injustice, and do you see that changing in the future?
Who wants to take that?
Well, the Women's Sports Foundation, we just released new research showing that actually the percentage of women who are covered in their sports participation is actually going down. Right now, it's about 2 to 3% of the entire sports pages are devoted to women. Women's pursuits and women's athletic endeavors. And, we have more and more sports and less women who are being, there are more stories on, horse racing and sort of the other category than there are in women's sports. And until women have great role models like yourself, and till they can see themselves as having the model of being a strong, assertive, aggressive, ambitious woman to grow up to be, they need to have that option to be able to see that and have that.
Let me add this real quickly. I think a part of it, as a media member, I think part of it is the media trying to figure out exactly how do women consume sports. Is it different than how men consume sports? At ESPN, we're starting something called the ESPNW initiative. We have some incredibly talented people who are working with this. We have Girl Magazine, which is going out to high school girls. There will be a TV component. There's going to be an internet component. And I don't want to speak for them because I haven't been involved in their meetings, but I think they're asking themselves the question of, gee, do women consume sports differently than men do? Is it more participatory? Is it less about watching a superstar play a game than what am I getting out of playing the game myself and creating content that speaks to that kind of audience? And maybe they can figure it out. Again, very bright people. If anybody can figure it out, it's the folks I know who are working with.
It's interesting, at the Olympics, the viewership is about 50-50. Just this past Olympics, it was a little bit more men than it was women. But you got to ask yourself, sort of, why are so many women watching the Olympics and not other types of sports? And all the questions that Tom's asking here about, is it sort of, they always talk about the human story, and they sort of flush out the people who are playing, and you kind of get a sense of what's going on when you're watching it. That's not my bailiwick, but
I have just an anecdotal hypothesis, but. Yeah. I do. I was really fast. I watched closely this year the difference in the Olympics and the way they were covered versus the way the men's sports was being covered because they were on at the same time. And I just thought it was interesting that the Olympics, as you said, both said, very storytelling, very humanistic. We got to know the families, and it just drew you in. And then you would watch the coverage of men's games, and they were all domination. Win at all costs. Yeah, it was just such a different style of coverage. And I said, well, it's not very appealing to perhaps a female audience that isn't otherwise naturally inclined to watch. And I don't know. So I'm glad you're doing that. We'll find out something.
Definitely.
Something.
Another question.
Tom won an award from the Women's Sports Foundation for some of his coverage on women's sports.
Another question here.
It's interesting when you. My name's Bobby Ann. I'm from Aspen. It's interesting as you talk about the sports and swimming, I'm a figure skater, and so the attention that's played on the Olympics for women's figure skating, nobody follows that for 4 years, but we're all crazy about it at the end of the day. And the media and the coverage for women's sports, until the colleges or the professional sports, actually the elephant in the room is the money. The kids are passionate about the sports, and so how do you get that? Us as parents and teams, and we would love to follow women's sports, but it's really all about the money, isn't it?
Well, let me share a
For the
perspective on
professional
that.
sport, the profession, to get it to that next level.
I have to admit, I went through my own education on this in the last few months, and I was surprised. I learned a lot, and I grew to respect the fact that the reason we had opportunities was not just Title IX, but the fact that for the NCAA, men's basketball contract pays for virtually everything. All the other sports with the NCAA, it's like 90%. So that's the men's basketball contract for the NCAA is incredibly important. What the universities themselves can generate through the football and basketball contracts then falls on top of that to their individual universities. So if Duke can be, incredibly successful at getting the allocation of the NCAA money plus raising their own money, they can have incredible programs. And that trickles down and funds all those other programs. And we have to be respectful of that, as that's where the revenue comes from. And so that's a fact of life. Without that stream of revenue, there wouldn't be the ability for any of those sports to exist.
So let me just add something on top. So what the basketball contract funds is all the NCAA activities,
Yes.
which is they do a lot of education. But they have amazing programs. They do. They're trying to get more women involved in sports, and they do training in that area. They've got all kinds of programs and whatnot. But when it comes to the individual school and their ability, there's something called, an economist would call it a prisoner's dilemma, which is every school thinks, if I spend more on my football coach or my football program, I will be able to recruit those athletes, and I will get into that small percentage of programs that are actually profitable. So everybody thinks that. So they all think, well, I need to build a new recruiting. And so there's this spending spree that's going on right now. And I'm talking about just the very top elite programs up there that is really taking away from all other sports. So the myth, you just sort of described this area where men's football and basketball is paying for everything else, and I would say that that's just not true. That in many ways, that except for a very few number of schools, there's only 6 schools in the country who are in the black. They're all in the red. For those of you who haven't seen it, the Knight Commission just released a new report right here that talks about this issue of sort of the spending spree and what are we doing about the spending spree.
But let me take it different. If those programs didn't spend on coaches' salaries and the things they do at the level they do, they wouldn't necessarily be in the black, and the figure skating would be in a much better position.
Okay. Well,
we'll debate off that.
Hold on. We're running out of time here, so we're going to take one more question.
I'm up in the nosebleed up here, right up top. I just wanted to push back a little bit on the financing of the NCAA and step back and look systemically at women. We control 85% of purchasing power in the world. Trillions. And we can change this. We've changed what's happening in politics. We can change what's happening in corporate America, and yet we're not. Any thoughts on that and galvanizing women?
Oh, I have so many thoughts on that. Your point, thank you. Your point is just so valid in so many areas, though, not just this one. We spoke yesterday in a panel about women as an emerging market. We think about India as an emerging market. We think about China as an emerging market. Women are referred to as the third billion. We are an emerging market as consumers, as employees, as entrepreneurs, as leaders, as sport participants. And 870 million of us around the world are coming into economic empowerment over the next few years. and we have an incredible power in that as an emerging market. Nobody's looking at us that way, and we're not using that power as voters, as consumers, as advocates. And do I have thoughts on galvanizing it? We have to do it within sectors, but the power is absolutely there, and you're so right. We're just not using it.
So I'd like to leave this with one final thought. We live in an era when people say, let's get the federal government out of our lives. The federal government can't solve problems. Next time someone tells you that, you have two words to utter: Title IX. Title IX came along in 1972. It cost nothing, and it changed the landscape of sports and American life as we know it. So, congratulations to everybody who's worked hard to make it happen. And thank you for coming.